The Waterloo Central School District responding after a walkout yesterday involving students and parents. Demonstrators say a school employee accused of making an inappropriate comment about suicide needs to be fired. Good evening, I'm Dan Schrack. The district says the protest incited fear and are now threatening disciplinary action. But as Natalie Kutchko tells us, some families have already been told they're not allowed back on campus. Natalie?
Dan, that was the message in a letter from the school district's attorney. We're told dozens of students walked out of class yesterday responding to the alleged comment and began to protest. They say this incident is part of a larger issue the Waterloo School District needs to address.
They listened to the announcements and then they were instructed by the leaders to then leave the school and then gather at the pavilion right outside the front doors.
Joshua Lamar is a Waterloo High parent and was among the group of dozens gathered outside the school Friday in a protest organized by students calling for change. In June, an 11-year-old Waterloo student died by suicide. Friends and family say the boy suffered ongoing bullying from other students. But the district says staff was never made aware, issuing a statement stating in part, quote, "There were no incidents of bullying reported to any staff at Waterloo Middle School related to any organizer's child." Earlier this week, some in the community claim a high school employee made an insensitive remark regarding the topic of suicide during the school day. The boy's mother was among those in the crowd Friday.
But I think everybody was just as much in shock as I was as to what was being said and what happened.
Colby Tears is a senior at Waterloo High who says bullying within the school isn't being addressed the right way.
We need more schools to be talking about mental health. They should not be sweeping their students' cries for help under the rug. If you are getting bullied, you are supposed to be able to go to someone you trust. These kids do not trust their teachers or adults here.
A statement posted to the district's website explains the protest caused, quote, substantial fear to the school community. And should a similar incident happen again, the district says it will uphold its code of conduct and take disciplinary action against participating students. Lamar is one of several parents who tells 13 WHAM they've been notified they won't be allowed on school grounds for taking part in Friday's assembly, per the district's attorney.
Parents of students at the school from even stepping foot onto the property without written authorization from the superintendent. That's ridiculous to me. Even though it was a peaceful assembly, they don't understand what the purpose is. The purpose is to change. The purpose is to get the evil out of the school district.
We have reached out to the superintendent of Waterloo Schools asking for her comment on the district's response, as well as the notices some parents have received from the district's attorney and have not heard back.
Criminal justice reform is getting praise from advocates and pushback from one local police chief. The Less is More Act, signed by Governor Hochul today, prevents recently paroled prisoners from being reincarcerated on technical violations, such as missing a curfew. But as 13 WHAM's Tyler Brown reports tonight, the Gates police chief is calling this law a big setback for public safety. Tyler?
Doug, the goal of this new law is to decrease the number of people incarcerated for minor parole violations and prevent overcrowding in prisons. But Chief James Van Brederode tells me the new law will make it harder for police to do their jobs. In 2015, David Olligood, a parolee, opened fire inside a Gates bar, killing a man and injuring 7 others.
There's a guy that was on parole. He had a 9 o'clock curfew. He violated every one of those little, rules, that weren't criminal. But what did it lead to, right? It led to a murder. So now he's back in prison for another 25, 30 years that we're paying for that. And, it's all because no supervision.
Gates Chief Van Brederode says he is concerned more events like this could happen under the state's Less is More Act. The law allows New Yorkers to avoid jail time for nonviolent parole violations, such as missing an appointment with a parole officer.
If you just set somebody out of jail and you don't provide them with the necessary supervision and resources, you're setting them up for failure.
Despite pushback, Governor Kathy Hochul and other supporters say the new law is a necessary reform.
New York State incarcerates more people for parole rules violations than anywhere in the country.
And I know the naysayers are going to say, as the majority leader said, well, look, you're letting more people out. But again, we should be a society that looks about rehabilitating people and reintegrating people, not reincarcerating people, again, for mistakes, oversights, or addictions.
But Chief Van Brederode sees it as a threat to community safety.
This isn't about racial profiling. This isn't about any of that stuff. This is about common sense policing and again, law enforcement's ability to be able to take the bad guys, the really bad guys, off the street.
And the law goes into effect statewide in March 2022.
September that killed 2 people and injured 14 others. Those arrests are not directly related to the tragic shootings that night. But as 13 WAM's Jane Shako reports, it is significant progress in solving the homicides. Jane?
Doug, I sat down with 4 investigators on the case, and they say 15 guns were fired that night, and they have a pretty good idea who possessed those weapons. But they're still looking for more people to come forward with information to nail down who exactly killed the 2 victims. A chaotic night in Rochester. 60 rounds fired, the gunfire lasting just over a minute.
For 980s, I need cars. I need citywide, all the police cars available to the scene.
Everybody's running, everybody's running.
This is truly a tragedy of epic proportion, if you ask me.
Hundreds of people were at a house party on Pennsylvania Avenue in the early morning of September 19th, 2020. Rochester police say an argument broke out between 2 people in front of the home. They believe someone tried to break up the fight by firing a gunshot into the air, triggering a tragic chain of events.
I lost my son, so that's something that I'll, pretty much endure the rest of my life.
2 teens, Jaquela Young and Jarvis Alexander, were caught in the crossfire and killed. 14 others wounded. A year later, investigators say they've identified several of the 15 people who had guns that night and have arrested at least 3 of those suspects for other alleged crimes, in turn getting information helpful to the case.
Someone might get arrested with a gun or something, and either through their attorney, the DA's officer, directly to us, they would try to work out some type of deal where I have information, I will help you, can you help me, that type of thing.
Investigators say the case remains complicated. Although they've interviewed hundreds of witnesses, they still don't know which suspects shot which victims.
So there's hundreds of different perspectives of what each person saw. And to track which bullet went from which person, it's not something you're probably going to get in a group like that where you're going to say, I know that person A shot person B.
Police are asking for anyone with information to step forward so they can connect the dots.
We need people to come forward. Their account of what occurred must match up with the physical evidence at the scene and with other witnesses. So it's very complicated.
RPD says they have enough evidence to prosecute those with guns that night, but if they do, they'd have to surrender all of the evidence, delaying any progress in the homicide case.